welcome to another episode of the Being and Doing podcast. And as you are probably used to until now, I start all the podcasts by introducing the speaker through my own lens. And today with me is Niela Miller. And we had a very interesting encounter through the Humans of Gestalt. And we started a conversation about talking about passions. And one important thing that immediately comes when you see Niela is passion all over. And I think even if you would look at this video now, you would see the colors all around her. So that was my first impression of Niela. And then I continued listening to her and exploring what she has lived through. And it was extremely interesting to observe that richness and that the amount of intimate touch with creativity she has. So that's basically what really sparked me to want to know more. And one thing I will just read from the book Being Alive that she has on her webpage, which is just the first sentence from Joseph Campbell. It is not the meaning of life we all seek, but the experience of being alive. And as this podcast is called Being and Doing, I'm actually really interested to explore with you, Niela, what does it mean to experience being alive? So welcome. And I would really want to start first to ask you, what are some of the words you identify yourself with?
Words or worlds?
It's an interesting thing. It can be both now. So let's try first words, and then we can go to worlds.
Well, you said a couple of them already. Certainly a passion for living, for being alive. In a way, that's enough for me. It's like I'm 86 years old now, and I still feel internally like I'm 30 or 40. I have a strong immune system, so I actually feel a lot more energy and aliveness than many people my age. My mind is still sharp. I haven't had any major diseases. I'm not doing what you asked me to do, come up with words, but single words don't do it for me in a way. Mm-hmm. It's better for me to just kind of describe what this being alive thing is for me, which is really having an acute awareness of my body, of my mind, of my spirit, of my feelings, and doing what one of my teachers called like a walking meditation. I don't sit down and meditate with my eyes closed. I just stay aware. And of course, the Gestalt training helped train me for that, of what's going on with me. So when I had my second COVID shot yesterday, I thought, well, let's just stay aware. Let's just see. So I guess awareness is one word, right? Mm-hmm. Let's just see what this experience is like. It's part of my life. It's part of my being alive, right? I had a very good night's sleep. I woke up this morning, and many people have said, well, if you're going to get symptoms, then the next day when you wake up, you'll feel. I felt fine. I kept looking and seeing. I feel a little bit sore in the arm, but I have muscle aches in my arms anyways, so it's no different from that. So it's a great appreciation that I got to live this long, longer than most people who've ever lived in the world. Think of that. Mm-hmm. And an amazing thing. And I have extreme gratitude for being a pretty healthy person and just for the simple experience of breathing in and out. of looking out the window and seeing the trees, of feeling the sun. Someone wrote a book several years ago called The God of Small Things.
Yeah.
Remember that? And that many, many small things bring me joy. Joy is another word. I would say that my mission is to enjoy life and to help other people enjoy their lives. That's been true of me for a long time. So,
and if I may ask here, I am amazed actually by the sheer experience of living 85 years on Earth.
86.
And 86.
Don't
I'm sorry.
keep me.
I made you younger, but no. I'm curious, how many different worlds have you lived in? And yeah, what did you observe changing in those worlds over time?
You know, that is such an interesting question. I'm afraid to get into it because I could take the whole rest of the time actually talking about
we
that.
can try.
But I have two main worlds I operate in. One is the one that involves an agreed upon reality, like the physical, biological world that we live in. And the other is Second Life, which I've been in for 14 years, which is online. It's a 3-dimensional world where people interact, do projects together. I have relationships going back 10 or 12 years with people that I do groups with, that I create new projects with, that I do conferences with. It's a mecca for people who are who love to teach and learn, who are creative, who like to explore and have adventures. It's a marvelous place, and we're trying to figure out why more people haven't been flocking into this 3-dimensional world, aside from using Zoom or Skype or FaceTime, which I also do. But the 3-dimensional world basically adds a whole other dimension. And even though you're represented by an avatar or an animated figure, you can use your real voice, and you can share space with people and activities with people. So that's a really important world for me. When I was first learning how to use the world, I spent much more time in it than I do now. I go in now to do particular projects, to have meetings with people. I have been an innovator, and not only of this tool that I've created called symbolic modeling, but also founded a music library so that composers who compose for virtual worlds or virtual world films or whatever could have their music in a place where people could come and listen in listening booths, which are rainbow notes up in the air that people can go sit up in. I have all my own music there. We have different concerts and things going on from time to time. And the building itself, we worked as a team to create this, is the most beautiful building I have seen in Second Life. It's an atrium. It's made all of glass. It's 3 stories. It's absolutely gorgeous. Then the other thing that I was an innovator for is a fairly new group called the Virtual Worlds Educators Consortium. So I, with 2 other educators, have put together a horizontal organization made up of educational groups all across this metaverse, where we're trying to solve different generic problems of educators in virtual environments, not to promote our own universities or our own projects, but to look at what are the things that we run into working in virtual environments, who's done research on it. We don't want to keep reinventing the wheel. How can we benefit from each other's knowledge and so on? So I've gone far afield of your question.
And I'm, if I can interject here, I'm curious, when you say virtual world, how do you experience it? So you are, do you wear goggles or
no, it's right online. You go to www.secondlife.com. It's free to join. They'll put you through a joining process. You have to download a viewer in order to get into the world. You have a login, you know, a username and a login name thing. And then once you're in there, there are thousands of different venues. There's a search engine where you can look up, let's say, music groups or art galleries or nature preserves, right?
Almost like a game. It's just played with real life material.
Well, it's not a game. It's an actual life experience. People who are in there consider it as much a part of their life as anything they do out here. So, and then, I mean, usually when you go in, you're told about it by somebody who you know, or like me, who says, you know, I will get you a mentor in there or help you get acclimated to the what you need to be able to do, sit, stand, walk, get messages, send messages, you know, all kinds of things like that. And then we'll help the person discover stuff in their own areas of interest. And then they will start joining groups. And then when they're in different groups, like there's a whole wonderful group called the Science Circle, made up of scientists who work in virtual and have all kinds of programs, all kinds of things to share. There are a bunch of different science groups, and they do exhibits, they do conference things. So if you came in, you know, I'd point you in that direction, or, I mean, you're interested in a lot of things. So, you know, so I can either experience myself seeing my avatar move around, or there's something called mouse look, where it will appear as though I'm looking out of my own eyes.
Nice.
I can go back and forth. I can also change from seeing the back of me to seeing the front of me. So there are a lot of different controls or things that you can do to manipulate your environment. And the learning curve is kind of interesting. It takes a while, but I'm still learning. There are a lot of different things to learn, but it's a tremendous thing. Yeah, and those of us who are in there, we're puzzling why more people, especially during this pandemic, there was an uptick of people joining. I think sometimes people are afraid of actually that will they be able to learn the technology involved? But really, it's no harder than learning Zoom. I mean, you have certain things that you just pay attention to. Anyway, so those are my two basic worlds. But then within my physical world, I have my art world. I take a lot of art classes. I have my music world. I'm working with a music ethnographer who's writing a whole chapter about me as a bridge person from the folk revival to early rock and roll. That's been very interesting. And he himself is a musician up in Canada and does things at a folk club there on YouTube. So I go to his concerts and we talk on Zoom. I've got lots of different worlds, I'll put it that way, in probably every art you can think of, and also physics. And I'm in a group exploring creative physics, like how to think about physics in creative ways. Wow. That meets once a month. and other things that'll come to me.
So,
Book.
actually, there are many questions that span out of everything you said, and I will start with living life as meditation, and it's something that having that constant moment-to-moment awareness of both your inner world and the outer world, and how the outer world impacts your inner world, is I feel it is a difficult thing. Yes.
And the other way around.
And the other
I'll tell you how I healed my finger.
Yes. And it's something that I would like to go more into. Let's start from the place where, when was it difficult for you to live like that? And what were the steps towards a more aware present moment life?
Well, that's hard to answer, because I think some people, and I put myself in this category, are born with the impulse to be aware, just like some people are born with other. I mean, I watched this Master Chef Junior thing. Little kids from 8 to 13 who've been cooking since they're 2 or 3, and turn out these fantastic meals that chefs 3 times their age can't do. There are people, I think, who are born with a proclivity for awareness, and I think that was true of me very young, that I was always very interested in what's going on inside me. How does that affect the way I'm interpreting what I'm seeing? What are my parents doing in this respect? My father, who I've inherited a lot of good stuff from, including my health, was never self-reflective. My mother was. But when I went to a school for higher consciousness called Eureka, the Eureka Institute. I don't know if you know about it.
No.
It was created by a guy, an adept named Oscar Ichazo from, I think it was Peru. My then husband discovered it, and him. One of these magical things went down to approximately where it's supposed to be. He didn't know exactly how to find it. He kept running into people, blah, blah, blah. In that school, we did many kinds of meditation. And
so that has happened in your school?
In this school, in this Eureka Institute. We did many kinds of meditation, chanting, a meditative massage called Chuaka. We were exposed to lots of different meditative forms. And then I had an experience with a guy named Greg Tiffin, who is no longer with us. I don't know how much time we have, but I got to tell you this story. This is fascinating. This guy was a professional military officer. He'd been in the military all his adult life. And he started having these weird dreams where Tibetan monks, we didn't even know what Tibetan monks were, but these monks in orange robes were coming to him in his dreams, telling him that he had to come to Tibet to learn what they needed to teach him. And he thought that this was ridiculous. He thought he was going crazy. The dreams kept coming, and he finally went to a shrink or a therapist, and he said, I don't know anything about any of this. It's driving me nuts. I'm a military man. And the therapist had the presence of mind to say, unless you've listen to that voice. This is going to be bothering you the rest of your life. So you better go. In the dreams, the monks told him where the monastery was that he was supposed to come to. He went. He stayed for 2 years. He learned all kinds of stuff. He came back. He was in the Boston area at the time, and so all the Gestalter, all the people who were in the business wanted to go and see this guy because he was doing readings using the stuff that he'd learned. So he switched from being a military man to being some kind of an adept. And so I go for a reading. I come in there and he says, well, you may be disappointed by what I'm going to tell you. He said, most people have a definite blueprint for the kind of house they need to build while they're in this life. He said, you don't. You're an eclectic. You can do anything. It's like a vacation life. You can learn from anywhere. You'll put things together, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, and now we're talking about this is like in the early 80s, right?
Yeah.
He said, you're going to do something that involves computers and art. Now, this was like 40 years ago. I knew nothing from computers. He told me to get a computer. He said, I don't know when this is going to happen. He said, I don't even know what I'm talking about, but this is very, very clear. All right, so years pass. I forget all about this. And then suddenly I'm in Second Life, creating a way to use arts processes for virtual learning. And suddenly, boom, I remember Greg Tiffin and what he told me 40 years ago, because I thought he was full of hot water. I couldn't even connect to what he was telling me, except that I liked art. I told him nothing about myself, so he didn't even know that I did art, I did music. He knew nothing about me, but apparently he did. So I realized, all of these awarenesses or these connections, the people I've run into, I could tell many stories about many people like this that I've run into in my life who read my, whatever it is, or I read them or whatever, and connections got made, which then became conscious later. So that's been a thread running through my entire life.
And I'm curious here when you say about the readings and about someone having the capacity of somehow intuiting your inner world. In which framework do you put this? Because obviously as scientists, we are limited in thinking in very deterministic ways. And something like this sometimes for us can seem even inconceivable.
That's right.
And I'm curious, what is your perception of it, and how do you explain?
Well, what helped me was being a member of the Institute of Noetic Sciences for many years. Mm-hmm. You familiar with IONS?
No.
Oh, you must look it up. These are bona fide scientists who've been studying consciousness for years and doing all kinds of research and experiments, writing up their research and so on. And it was started by Edgar Mitchell, who was one of the first astronauts who went up into space. And he had an epiphany up there, which he couldn't explain to himself, of seeing how everything was connected, seeing the earth, seeing the planets, seeing himself and his connections as things. And he came back from that and created the Institute of Noetic Science. He wanted to get bona fide scientists together to help him understand what had happened to him, but also what its relationship was to the natural world and to our consciousness. And of course, quantum physics has also come up with a lot of stuff about being able to be in a couple of places at once, and how changes occur without any direct contact with things. I'm probably saying this awkwardly, but you probably know exactly what I'm talking about.
Well, I'm not a physicist, so I would need to ask and find a physicist to elaborate on this. But I'm interested in just the concept you have for yourself.
So that is it. It is. It can be a legitimate study of science and scientists to figure out the relationship between human consciousness and all of the phenomena that exist in the natural world. That and they have come up with amazing research about some of these connections. And of course, the people studying these out-of-body experiences where people die and they die for a little while, and they see themselves, they hear the conversations that are going on with doctors, they can repeat what was said when they are supposedly out of this world. There's so much research that's been done on this now that it seems irrefutable that there's some way that human consciousness is larger than what it appears to be encased in. Yeah. So that's my framework, but I'm an agnostic. I don't really know whether there's a life after death. I'm much more interested in the present.
Yes.
And in the here and now. So that is a framework for me of, how I live my life. But I'm always fascinated by mystery and by alternate worlds. Now, the other connection is, and when I was a child, I read all the fairy tale books and all kinds of children's books where children enter other worlds. And I was always fascinated by that, by the world of the imagination, like how the author created this world. Or even Mary Poppins. Are you familiar with Mary Poppins?
Yes,
where she takes the children into a drawing and they are then in another world. Like the possibilities of the human imagination to create worlds endlessly, so that when the opportunity or when I found out about Second Life, I knew immediately, here's my alternate world that I can go into and play in. And it felt like coming home. It felt like all of this fascination with alternate worlds, that this was just a continuation of that.
And I'm curious, so I always think of this movie, Life is Beautiful, where
yes,
you have Roberto Benigni, I think, as the main character, kind of making the world a play for his son, in a very dire circumstance. And I feel,
very powerful.
So in a way, for me, that's sometimes the role also of a therapist. The therapist is always embedded in the current world, and sometimes it is extremely difficult also for the therapist, but the therapist kind of already tapped into this pool of possibilities and can expand the possibilities of the client. So I'm wondering, when you as a therapist were going through challenging periods in your own life, how were you molding them, or how would you transforming them into an experience that's more like game-like, without taking away from the seriousness of the situation, obviously? and then still being there for the people in your life or for yourself.
Answer this another way, because I've got like one of the most powerful, difficult, but also enthralling experiences of my life was when my 21-year-old daughter died. And she'd been born with a condition called neurofibromatosis, which no one knew anything about when she was born. And then it developed later into neurofibromosarcoma. That's actually what killed her. And she was living in a hospital for 6 months, and I would go every day. And my then husband and I had the presence of mind to get her into a young people's ward for recovering from injury, all kinds of injury, rather than being in a cancer ward with old people. And Jenny wanted to be a special ed expert or teacher, using her own experience as the basis for that. And she spent her last college semester at the University of Indiana, doing a lot of work with that. And so when she was bedridden, we encouraged her to invite these kids to come in to her room and for her to talk with them and to practice being a counselor and helping them with getting through their trauma and their injury and so on, just kid to kid. I mean, she was not a licensed counselor, but it was very helpful for these children to be able to talk to a young person who they knew was not going to be recovering, but had a lot of care and a lot of what good ways of being with them. It changed my work with corporate people profoundly, because I started looking at life cycles in organizations, something I had never paid attention to before. And I began to, with these corporate and other nonprofit groups and these organizations that I work with, have them look at where they were in their life cycle. What had they given birth to initially? Had they reached adolescence? If so, how did they know it? Were there things that needed to die, that they needed to let go of? So it became a whole metaphor out of my experience with my daughter of a whole other way of working with organizations. Also, when I did personal work, I for 25 years, I was a group facilitator at a growth center out in Western Massachusetts called the Rowe Conference Center. And people would come to do personal development work and so on. And very shortly after my daughter died, I was scheduled to do a personal growth, like a weekend or something. And I let go. I shared my grief very strongly, told people about my daughter, about what happened, and then invited them to get into any kind of grieving that they had suppressed or put aside. Who were the people, the pets, whatever, the lost opportunities or whatever that they grieved for. So those are specific examples of how some, what apparently traumatic event in my life also had silver linings and definitely affected, my work with people and organizations.
This is actually, I have to say, very beautiful, because it's always, for me, somehow coming from a country where we are kind of in a post-traumatic stress syndrome trapped. collectively, because of all the wars and the bombing and everything. It's always, we have a tendency to overly dramatize life. And I actually have to say, only when leaving the country, I was able to get in touch with this kind of a completely different view of dramatic situations.
You left where to go to where?
So I left Serbia to go first to Switzerland, and now I'm in the UK.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 3 extremely different places.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge and the beauty for me. But yeah, the interesting part when you're saying all of this is that it is the life as a meditation kind of experience, which you actually now described how you precisely do it. And it's beautiful to actually see that even in that space where a lot of people would become inhibited to think creatively, you have found a creative solution. And this is something that I really kind of almost like, where do you find that? Where is the source? You know, I mean, it's a very simple, naive question, but it seems that your brain is somehow almost malleable to an extent that's sometimes inexplicable to maybe many other people. So yeah, I'm very curious. You said that that's part of your childhood, and I remember you said there was a lot of music and singing in your home, but is there some active component of that, some learned component, or it's just,
well, the thing that comes to me, and it's I don't know if you watched yet my 80th birthday thing. All right. So my friend Caroline, who's being the docent, and she's talking about a group we did where we talked about the lessons we learned from our mothers.
Yes.
And that mine was express, express, express. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Vaguely. All right. So that's one answer. And that is that I've never been inhibited about expressing myself. And sometimes it's gotten me into trouble because there are so many other people who are inhibited in that way, and they are intimidated by my freedom.
Yeah.
And different things. I mean, you had a very healthy response, like, I want to learn more about this. I want to be more blah, blah, blah. This person seems to know something about this. Other people will run the other way, and or even start not liking me because I'm out there and they're in there.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's that component, and I have also tempered myself over the years so that if I am working with what I call mousy people who are very timid and sensitive, I'll tone way down to match wherever they are. I'll talk in a very soft voice. I won't have too much body language going on. I'll stay with them right where they are, so that they can trust that I'm not going to stomp all over them, and then gradually, they're able to try new things and so on. And then I also raise my expression to meet that, and we go together like that. So I'm not sure whether that answers your question partly. I also there are risk takers and risk avoidant people, right? And it's very interesting for me to work with risk avoidant people because it turns out that they take certain risks, but not others. That everybody, if you're alive, takes a risk about something,
or what is a risk for one person is not a risk for
or
another.
it changes. Like my daughter says, I'll fight with my husband about the important things. I'll just let the other things go. I'm not going to take him up on every single thing that I disagree with, which is very wise of her. I think she's got that gene also.
I mean, that's actually seeing you, and that's actually what's, again, an impression mine of you, is that you help people, and the way you were mimicking with your hands is you help people to really blossom, and this that you are a being on infinite potential. And this is something that really, when I see you, it's really perspiring, in the sense that your infinite potential then opens up the infinite potential in others. So it is
the word that people have used most with me has to do with inspiring. I inspire other people to do things that they would not have considered before that, or either haven't thought of, or have been afraid of, or need to have models of, or whatever. I'm looking for something now because I think that you'd find this very interesting. One of the peak experience I had, do you know about the Banff Center, BANFF Center in Canada?
No,
it's in Western Canada. It's a marvelous place where people go to learn to be leaders. And they also use the arts a lot. So they invited me and a handful of other people who work with creative process to come and work with, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 dozen leadership people or thought leader, people who write, people who research, people who teach. It was fantastic. At the end of the time with them, they were supposed to create some kind of a model which incorporated things that they had learned, and damn it. My metaphor as a lead facilitator is that I'm in an intricately carved wooden jewelry box with a simple lid that's easy to open. Inside me are all sorts of jewels and trinkets, which I can make available to my owner, to Niela, or to go with what she's wearing, the project, and can also loan or give away these gems and precious metals to others, the client group, for their use. Sometimes the selection process is overwhelming because I have so much inside me, but if I really look and see what's needed, I can make the right selection or ask for help with it. Some of what I offer has a price attached to it, but I also like to give gifts, resources, extra support, laughter, whatever, whenever I can. And this helps me think about being basically open. The lid's not locked. And trusting in my dealings with people. I hope this, I found this because I think it's part of the answer to your question.
Absolutely.
Having a lot of intricate carvings, like my life experience and knowledge, which is mostly apparent when people interact with me, and creating a balance between what I sell and what I give away regarding my inner resources. It also helps me think about what is appropriate for which, quote, outfit, what is interchangeable, what I can leave to others to decide. I could also go deeper into the types of treasures inside the box, their characteristics, and what insight this gives me, like silver is quite different from rubies. So you can see that if I were applying this to a future vision, I could use many of the ideas, values, and feelings to enhance whatever else came up. So I love working with metaphor. I think that's one of the best ways of getting people to realize that they have so many resources, internal resources available to them for working with. But this is funny because it's not what I was looking for. What I was looking for was related to this Banff Center experience, where I asked people after we worked together for 3 or 4 days, if you were going to write a sentence or two about what I do, what would it be? Because I always find it's very useful to get outside ideas or opinions, because we never can see all of who we are. And it was tremendous what they come up with. When I left the place that I was working, which was the Associates for Human Resources in Concord, I was doing Gestalt Therapy. I was working with organizations. I was teaching. I was doing a lot of things. I left to form People Systems Potential. And then I wrote a letter to everybody I knew or could think of and told them all of the different possibilities of ways that we could interact. And actually, I got many responses from that. So there's a combination, isn't there, of putting stuff out into the world and then being receptive and seeing what wants to come in. And it's Pearls is contact and withdrawal, right? Yeah, so it's a living way. It's a way to live that, to initiate things. And then, and Tiffin actually, when he did, as part of this reading he did, he said, once you make a statement or whatever, you don't need to do anything else. Just wait, see what shows up. And so I wrote a book called Counseling in Genderland. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes, that's another thing I want to get to. But before I get to that, I actually have questions concerning therapy and your journey there, because I read this morning that you had Gestalt experience, but also experience in Jungian therapy and other styles. So first of all, I want to hear a little bit more about your Gestalt journey. And did you work with Pearls directly, and how did
he did? I think his last full training workshop at our house in Lexington, Massachusetts. It was 4 days. There were a whole bunch of Gestalt therapists there. I still clearly remember the work that I did. And I was his, Bob and I should say, you heard something about it in the Humans of Gestalt thing. Bob is a lifelong friend, and we were married.
We need to not assume actually anything, because I'm not sure if people know even who Fritz Perls is.
Oh, okay. Well, Bob was my husband of 17 years, and we studied Gestalt together. But he went on to create something called visual language, or putting visual material and text together, and that's a whole other story. But so Fritz was coming to Boston, and we were going to host him. And at first he was going to give a lecture at Boston University, which we would take him to, and then we'd take him to where he was staying, and then we would, actually he was staying with us, and then he would be doing this workshop at our home in Lexington. Now, for people who don't know, Fritz Perls, or Frederick Perls, was the founder of Gestalt Therapy, along with Hefferlein and Goodman. They wrote a book in the 50s called Gestalt Therapy. And the way I discovered Gestalt, I think I may have told this story on the Humans of Gestalt tape, but for people who didn't hear that, I was working at a bookstore. I would take over the arts and psychology mezzanine when they went out to lunch. And I would pull books at random, off the shelves. And one day I pulled this Gestalt Therapy book. I didn't know what Gestalt was or what it meant. And when I looked in it, I had an epiphany, because it was like the way my brain was organized. I said, I've got to learn more about this. I read it from cover to cover. I did all the exercises. I read everything else that he wrote, and then started reading other ones. But it wasn't for a number of years that I actually did Gestalt therapy training with him and probably every pioneer of Gestalt therapy. I've probably worked with all of them. And part of my job was bringing people to this center, the Associates for Human Resources, to do public workshops and then to work with our staff in a training way. So we worked with Isidore Fromm. We worked with, there's a whole list of people. So I got a very good training and background in Gestalt. And at the time, there were no degrees. You just studied Gestalt, and then you set up your practice. I had a natural inclination toward this kind of therapy. I did it myself. I did it with other people. And I would say that as a life philosophy, I am a Gestaltist. It's not just a therapy. It's a way of life. It's a perspective about life that encompasses everything that you see and do.
Yeah, funnily enough, that was my experience when I encountered Gestalt. Is suddenly I felt like, this is home. Yeah. I just felt like I landed.
Exactly. And a great way to put it.
And the interesting thing is that now when I started reading and listening to all of you in the Humans of Gestalt, it just feels like, and these people, they are my community. I don't know them, and maybe somehow I don't need to know them, but just their existence liberates me. I actually, for the audience, I would like to try to explain what is it that Gestalt brings out in you, and what is it that you learn from Gestalt, if it's possible. I know that's a very big topic. But
as we say in the old country.
Yeah. Ouch. Let's try to decompose it as far.
For one thing, living in the present, being in the present moment and nowhere else, and valuing what's happening in the present as your life instructor, your teacher. Right now, you're asking me questions that are making me think and pull out stuff that I think is going to be responsive to what you're asking, realizing that there's a lot more that I could offer or say, and then just trying to stay with whatever our process is. So being in the here and now, that's certainly one. The second is one we referred to before, the contact and withdrawal. That is, that you're not in a fixed state, but you're always trying to achieve homeostasis, some kind of a balance between making contact and needing to be inside, being aware of your surroundings, and so on. And then for me, in particular, the connection between the arts and Gestalt. has been very important. And I still, when I have people make symbolic models in my virtual world, I have them become these models and speak to the maker and have dialogues or parts of them. So maybe there's a particular color. What is it like being red? What is it like being a cube as opposed to a triangle? What is it like being larger or smaller? Because one of the advantages in a virtual world is that you can change things immediately in a way that you can't in the physical world. So you can stretch things and make them very large. You can change parts of a thing. You can go inside by creating a phantom thing and seeing that world you created from the inside out. So it gives you all kinds of perspective that would be pretty impossible out here, even though, as you'll see in my manual, I use a lot of sensory ways of working with people. There's this additional dimension of being able to change things, but not only that, the realization that they create their own reality, that we create our own reality, that whatever it is you're building to represent a feeling state is your current perception of what it is like to be angry, sad, fearful, whatever, and that can change. It's malleable. And so it's very, very exciting for me to use Gestalt in that way. I just did one that I do periodically called Visions of Self, where people actually make either two-dimensional, make drawings and upload them, and we put them in my virtual gallery of aspects of who they are, but completely abstract, without any human or any recognizable objects. Mm-hmm. And it's also hopefully an outside-in process. That is, that you're not focusing on a problem or a feeling or whatever, you're just creating something. And then we're going to find out what its meaning is when I guide you through it, right? So some people do these things that go up on the wall. Other people do in the moment builds in real time in virtual. So those are two different ways of approaching this, but they certainly are based on arts processes of different kinds of creating things that have color, shape, dimension, and produce meaning as you work with them metaphorically, sort of like the thing I worked on before with you, the treasure box. So did I answer your question?
Yes, actually, I also want to explore a little bit what was your most challenging, without any disclosure, obviously, place to work with people, let's say?
Yeah, two of them. One has to do with borderline personalities, and one has to do with very passive people, mm-hmm. who where it's a lot of work to help them take any kind of initiative at all. And I think that if I go deeply into myself, it's a part that I would not like or do not like to get in touch with. That is of being completely helpless, passive, unable to take an action, like being completely paralyzed or whatever. Thinking about my old age, I'm 86 now, I'm fine, but in 10 years from now, I don't know what condition I'm going to be in, how much help I'm going to need, how I'm going to maneuver among what my choices are that are left, because I usually focus on what I can do rather than what I can't do.
Mhm.
So working with people who feel like they can't do anything and they have nothing and they're worthless and so on, because it puts me in touch with the potential of getting, having those experiences myself. I don't like it, but I'm aware enough to understand that's what's going on. I'm thinking, well, what would help me under those conditions, and then I start to get ideas. And then the other one is, I had a boyfriend who is a Gestalt therapist, who was at least character disordered. When I tried breaking up with him and he wouldn't pick up his stuff, I brought his stuff and left it at his place. And then he brought all of it back and put it in front of my door with a note, "Oh, no, you don't."
Oh, wow.
That kind of person, like who has a disordered way of, here I thought, I'm doing the guy a favor. He won't even have to come over and pick this stuff up. I'm going to bring it to him. Good old me. And then to have it land again. And then to be in a position of, well, do I throw it away? What do I do with this? That's another challenging thing when people have what I call a screw loose, that they're not, that there's some part of their mind that's not thinking rationally. And so they're doing things which I guess make a lot of sense to them, but no sense to anybody else or to me.
And so what were your ways of dealing with these situations, at least internally, if not externally?
Well, I did finally, I took out a few things from his belongings, that like a back roller that I thought would be a really good thing to have. I dumped the rest of it, and I didn't have any more contact with this person. He was not a therapy client. Well, he came to a group of mine. That's how we met. But it would be too long to try to go into all of that. But the way I dealt with it was that I thought, well, all right, here this is. This guy is not going to come and pick this stuff up again. So now, in effect, he's given it to me, and it's my prerogative what I do with it. Yeah. And then for people who are very depressed or very passive, I learned how to sit with them and then notice small body movements, and then would bring their attention to the fact that something was moving, and I wonder what it was saying, and that would often engender more liveliness, or even an attempt to suppress more, which of course doesn't work. Because you have to breathe, you can't just turn it off. So staying with what is, not trying to change the person, but just staying with what is, and being what one of my great teachers, Arnie Mindell, calls an exquisite observer, noticing small things. In my I don't know if I share this story on Humans of Gestalt, but I love to tell this story of the guy who told me he was finished with his work on his mother, and he wanted to thank me, and da-da-da. And while he's telling me this, he's killing an ant on the floor. He's squashing an ant.
Mm-hmm.
that led, of course, to a whole bunch of work about his actually having wanted to kill his mother at times, but never admitting it to himself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the beauty of the therapeutic art, I would say, is that everything is in the eye of the observer as well. So thanks for sharing this small.
That's why it's so important to learn how to be an exquisite observer, to be able to notice everything. Now, in the virtual world, or like I worked with a guy in Afghanistan who was stationed in Afghanistan over Skype.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't see the whole lower part of his body, but I could hear. Like in these situations, I have to pay attention to vocal rhythms, the sound of the voice, the vocal tics like or you know, things that are going on that you might not pay attention to when you have the person in the room. So it's like a blind person learning to be more astute with what they're hearing. So each circumstance, right, brings out some other aspect of what it is you can learn or what you can use to help that other person.
And I actually have to say that's also what I admire about you, is that you constantly talk about learning. And learning seems to be a indivisible part of your life.
Yeah.
So it's really, I'm also curious about how is it that you just don't get tired of learning, and you're just like, I can't learn anymore. Like, it's enough, you know?
Well, because it's part of my lifeblood. I mean, when I take an art class and the teacher gives a prompt to do something that I have never heard of and never done, in this last class, we learned how to make flexagons. Now, if you go to Flexagon on Google, you'll see there are lots of different kinds of ways of folding and gluing paper so that you have many different surfaces. How exciting is that? So it feeds me. It doesn't enervate me. Learning, particularly, I mean, if I have the choice about what it is I want to learn, or putting myself. So in art classes, I usually gravitate toward abstract art classes or classes with teachers who I know think have a way of thinking that is compatible with the way I think, and who I'm definitely going to get some new ideas from. If we had time, I'd just show you all kinds of things.
And I'm curious, actually, in that learning process, when, for example, I don't know if we take art or singing or whatever you prefer, but there is at this point where you feel a little bit of frustration, that you see that there is a part of it that you still are not, let's say, good at technically. And maybe, like, you know, your expression needs more. In order to match your expression, you need more of a technical skill.
Are you talking about yourself, Alexandra?
No. I'm talking about myself in my personal experience. But then there is this moment also when when you see little kids and they're trying to, I don't know, learn how to put their shoes on, or like how to tie
and they haven't caught up with the ability to do it.
Exactly. So actually, I read in one book about mothering and child rearing, is that like just this moment just before you learn and become good at something is almost like the most frustrating moment. You're so close but so far away. So I'm curious if you ever experience this. Maybe you don't experience this.
I take care of that by considering myself an amateur in most things. An amateur is somebody who loves what they're doing, but may not necessarily be technically great at it. My aunt thought I could be a concert pianist, but I would never have wanted to practice 6 hours a day. It just wasn't for me. But I love playing the piano. I love sitting down and sight reading music. I love writing music. I don't care whether it's technically great or not. I love the experience itself. And I'm a pretty good sight reader, so I can read stuff and have fun with it. And then if I come across a piece that I really love, I'll spend time going over it dozens and dozens of times until I've learned it. So for me, and I don't drive myself crazy with things that I know I don't have the ability for. My son-in-law is my financial advisor. He's fantastic at it. In fact, he's one of a small handful of award-winning socially responsible investing people in the world. And he has a whole group called the Arbor Group that's with UBS, which is very large. I don't know if they're international. They may be.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
So I turn over all of the financial stuff to him. He's a guy of tremendous integrity. So I trust him 100%. He's a terrific husband and father with my daughter, you know. And it's such a comfort to have somebody actually in my own family that I can, but I do not understand prospectuses or financial reports or anything like this, and I don't have to.
Yeah.
I can ask other people who have technical expertise in areas that I don't, but where I need to be involved somewhat to carry that for me. So I think that that's part of it too. Too many people feel like they can't ask for help or can't ask for support and things that they're unable to do or incapable of doing. I'm not a professional artist. I love doing art. I would say that my art, I do pretty nice art. I mean, art that pleases me, that I get good feedback about, but I'm not a professional artist, so I don't have to worry about putting, having shows in galleries or selling my art. I put it on my website. I tell people if they want to download it to please make a contribution to their favorite cause, or they can send it to me in PayPal. Anything I get in PayPal, including your $5, goes to Act Blue, or one of the good funding organizations that tries to promote things like climate change or whatever it is.
And this actually really comes back now to me in the topic of success, because the reason I actually like people like you is that we are somehow sometimes caught up in performance, and your life is performance and art, but somehow in a very beautifully tied in way. So actually I want to ask you, what does it mean for you to be successful?
To be successful means to follow your muse wherever it leads you and to give 100% to that endeavor. It never had anything to do with money for me. I always made enough to pay my bills. That was enough for me. Time is what is of the greatest value. So, just in terms of values, I have to look at it in the light of success. So for me, success is being able to use my time in such a way that I am helping both myself and other people simultaneously in some way or other. Like we're doing now, this helps me, this helps you, this may inspire other people, it may not. I don't care. We're doing this now. It's interesting. If people pay attention, they may pick up some things that give them ideas. Who knows? I will never know, probably because I won't get the feedback. But the success comes from actually having committed myself to this process. which is, from my point of view, a successful process because you're asking good questions, things you're really interested in. I'm talking about things I'm interested in. So what's not successful?
Yeah. I actually, what you said is exactly now for me. I can fully imagine it in my post. It's exactly what I would say. So it's going to become a one of those quotes things.
Well, and I also have to admit that there are some things that we can never be successful at. I mean, I would like to see racial justice and climate change turn a corner in my lifetime, gun control and so on. It has a long, long history of like one slow step at a time. There is, I thank Trump for having brought all of this to the foreground. That's the silver lining of Trump. That all of this got an acceleration because of him. If he hadn't been the president, this wouldn't have happened. It would still have been sotto voce. So, but I know that in my lifetime, I will not see, it's very unlikely that I will see real progress in any of these areas. However, I saw a Black president. So that made me very happy. And then I see now a woman vice president who's Asian, Black, Caucasian. I mean, she's everything. So the God of small things.
Yeah.
I'm seeing little aspects of this. People are not putting up with the kind of abuse that they used to put up with. They want this guy who killed George by leaning on his neck in the public eye. Women, the whole Me Too movement, that's another thing that Trump started unwittingly.
Yeah.
He made it possible for women to start coming out and saying, this happened to me too, me too, me too. Thousands and thousands of women. The other thing he did unwittingly was to get the youth involved. Young people are now social change agents more than they have ever been at any time in history. And Greta, Greta, who's doing, I mean, this would have been unthinkable 10 years ago. And so
actually,
that's exciting.
Sorry. This brings me to your work with the transgender community, and actually, when I'm thinking of this, and I'm sorry I didn't have the time to read the book, but when I'm thinking about this, what my first curiosity is what did you learn from them about gender?
Oh, come on! This is a whole other hour.
Of course.
But I would encourage you, if you don't have the book, to get it. It's just $1 or $2.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
I also talked about the difficulty with the pronouns. Now, this book came out in 1995. So, this is like over 25 years ago. I said, it is just not adequate to have the pronouns she and he, because when you really go into gender exploration, you realize there's a whole lot of things in between for which these words don't fit. And the person who got closest to that, what was her name? What's the word that sounds like androgyny? The woman who wrote about androgyny back then, about questionable genders, or not being able to put people into categories right away when you see them, and what the effect of that is. So I was already kind of bringing up things that people weren't talking about. And it's been so interesting to see how gender people are struggling with this linguistic puzzle of what do we do with the language? Now, as a former English teacher, this was before I was a therapist, to use the word they or them for a single person, it is so hard for me. I'm hardwired with grammar, grammatical rules of different kinds. So it requires, to come back to your question, it requires a shift in my own perspective to be able to use language the way they want me to use it in relation to them. Things have changed so much since then. I was working mainly with cross-dressers. The transsexual people hadn't come onto the scene, or the femme to male.
Mm-hmm.
That started happening more in the 2000s. So the book that I wrote had mainly to do with my work with cross-dressers and what that was about, and also some right at the beginnings of the transsexual stuff. But now I have many close friends in the trans community. For me, it's a sort of like a non-event, non-issue. I know these people, I know they're trans, but that's not the main thing anymore that interests me about them. It's their other qualities, or who they are as human beings. I happen to meet them in that context. Do you understand?
Yes,
So,
yes.
and with some of them, I've done projects out in the community of like educating counselors, who that's what my book was for, about how they have to prepare themselves in order to deal with the trans world, that it's not like working with other people. It does require special preparation. So,
And what are the challenges there? Because for me, thinking as someone who would accept any expression, I always feel like I wouldn't even need to understand, in the sense of, like, if they would want me to call them a certain way, that's no problem. But we seem to have a certain resistance to this. And so
older people mainly. I mean, I'm already an exception to the rule in my
absolutely, yeah.
in my age thing. But most people, let's say over 65 or 70, who grew up with he and she, it's very difficult for them to wrap their minds around all of these, and especially in the past 8 to 10 years, when there's been a tremendous array of gender expression. It's interesting that I, quote, adopted, I'm the faux aunt of a young person who just turned 12, who started out as Violet, has 2 lesbian moms, and is now VO and wants to be called he. So here it is, right in my own front yard, with this kid. And nobody in the church is having a problem. Everyone's switched over from she to he. So VO has definitely discovered that this is who he is. So very, very interesting, and also a very creative person, and does all kinds of art. That's what's mainly interesting to me about him. And he's in I do a Zoom art class, creative process class every 2 months with bunches of people from my church, their relatives, their friends, and some of the kids. Just great having kids in there too. And so Vio's in that. And I just made a bag, a birthday bag, because his birthday is, I think, next week, with many, many different goodies in it. Some are old, some are new. None are borrowed or blue, I don't think, but all different kinds of little surprises, things too, because that is, for me, that's like the treasure chest of who he is, to keep unwrapping different things and finding out more and more about himself. So,
wow, that is that, I mean, as you say, at the end of the day, that is only one aspect of who they are, and it doesn't really matter. It's just, as all of us, we have a lot of different expressions. So
but they
I
do
think
need to
sometimes
have a community. They need to have a community, just like Black people need to feel safe and protected and connected with each other, even though they're out in society in all kinds of roles. That there is something about feeling a basic safety from which you can emerge. So the trans, on Facebook, there is a group for Fantasia Fair, which was the event that I worked at for years and years, and I still do occasionally, where people post things, you know, and they all love Provincetown. I don't know if you know about Provincetown, but it's the most open place in the United States for every kind of everything, especially sex and gender. And they have all kinds of events and parades and all kinds of events. And that's where Fantasia Fair is held, usually the third week of October. And they couldn't do it this year because of COVID. And it was a real difficulty for so many people who look forward to this 1 week of the year where they can be freely who they are, with people who also are who they are, you know, and there's no judgment, and they're in a town where they can walk around and feel free. And the police too, there's a trans person on the police force in Provincetown, you know, make sure that they're okay. It's an amazing thing. So, but that question of, I've learned a tremendous amount from my trans brothers, sisters, and otherwise about myself, about being trans, about living in a society that is fearful. But the younger generation has a much less difficulty because you've been much more exposed on the media, in movies, in music, in all kinds of ways, to this phenomenon that the older people never were until it came onto talk shows as a something to laugh at or ridicule or whatever. And so The World According to Garp, that movie was the first movie that ever treated transsexualism seriously and wasn't a joke. And it's a book, I think it was is it Thomas Wolfe? The World According to Garp. It's worth reading.
Yeah, I will actually, all of this is kind of an exploration for me, and I always get a resource from every interview I do, and it's really a wonderful
You'll never cover it all in one lifetime, I don't think.
No, I don't think so, but there are things that will converge together as well. So I have kind of, to wrap up, a few small questions. Well, one is big. One is, what was one truth about reality that you feel like you were resistant to accept for the longest time? That, you know, you kind of had this almost internal battle into accepting that, oh, this is real. I need to align myself.
That not all people are good.
Yeah, I understand that one. I can relate to that one, actually.
You know, even when the spiritual directive comes that you must be able to forgive everyone and see humanity in everyone, I cannot do it with Hitler. I mean, I know that at one point he was just a little baby, And he was also a painter, an artist. So, I could love those two things about him, but
Yeah.
But the other side of that is like what I was saying about Trump, that in some ways you need these kinds of oligarchs or tyrants to come onto the world scene in order for other people to rise up and discover their own need for justice. So I don't know, but the reality, I'm a very trusting person. I don't like being cynical about people. I don't like them to have to prove that they're trustworthy in order for me to trust them. But I do know, after living all these many years, that there are prime manipulators and people who I might call evil among us. And that's a reality that's hard for me to accept.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that one. And then what is a small absurd thing about you that not many people know about?
That's easy. I don't have a navel.
Oh, wow.
I had an umbilical hernia after the birth of my first child, who was almost 10 pounds. And the doctor neglected to tell me that he would just sew me straight across. He wouldn't try to do any plastic surgery. And I laughed it off for the longest time, but then I did a big piece of work on that later on with Anna Halprin. I don't know if you know her from the dance world.
No.
She ran something called the San Francisco Dance Company, an amazing woman. And I actually helped her because when I went to a workshop and I was going to work on this and my scarring and different stuff that I used my humor as a way of deflecting. I had found out that she had life-threatening cancer and all kinds of surgeries, and she hadn't done any work on it in a group setting. And I challenged her. I said, I'm going to do this work, and I want you to do that work. And so she came in one afternoon, completely naked, with a black hood over her head, and danced this experience with cancer, and people were sobbing. But of course, it raised the level of all the work that went on in that workshop after that. And I certainly did a lot of work on my rage with doctors for not giving me the full story, for me not knowing what was going to happen, for not having a choice about it. Just so many things. And for my self-loathing about how my belly looked and could I ever show this to a man again? I'm in a very, very different place, but that was a big, big piece of work. And so it's a little absurd thing, a navel. Who cares? Yeah. Right?
Wow. And actually, thank you for the whole humanity of what you have brought to this interview, because there were so many moments of very deep expression, but then somehow you managed to always put them in the context of a beautiful lesson. So thank you very much for that. And one more, this kind of rapid fire question is, what kind of compliments do you like to receive?
I'm not big on compliments, actually. I like people to tell me that they like the colors I'm wearing or the jewelry I'm wearing, because it's part of my art expression. I love them to really enjoy my art or my music, the things that I create. The compliments that I like have to do with my self-expression and whether it brought them enjoyment. I guess another compliment is like when my quite well-known friend, Alana Rubenfeld, who created this whole school of psychology and body work called Rubenfeld Synergy. When she came to my 60th birthday, which was quite a thing, she said, "Oh my God, I've got to do this. I'm going to conduct." I haven't conducted for years. We both studied conducting. And so I went to her 60th. That was a tremendous compliment, that she got inspiration from something I did, and then she went off and did her own thing. I like that.
Wow. And the last question is there something you would ask yourself that you always wanted to somehow express, but you didn't have the space to be asked by someone else?
Gosh. That would take a little time for me to think about. Nothing comes to mind, because I've been asking myself questions all my life.
All the time.
Well, one thing that I guess would be interesting at some point would be to tell the a kind of challenging story of my romantic life. We didn't get into that at all. And I would say that is the part of my life that really didn't work for me. Everything else did. But no one has ever asked me, and I have certainly done stuff with it. Like, I did a whole collage of all my old boyfriends and lovers and wrote a little bit about each one. But I think that there's something probably still unfinished about that, but I'm not sure.
Well, that can be another podcast, actually.
I don't know.
You have just heard the story of Niela Miller, truly a creature of infinite possibilities. Born into a family of artists, she pursued a major in creative arts and has made arts and composed music throughout her career. In addition, she maintains a Gestalt Therapy practice. Throughout her eclectic life, she has used expressive media in almost everything she does. A large part of training others has been teaching teachers, coaches, therapists, and business-oriented individuals how to utilize art-based processes in their work. You can connect with her and find more information about her work on www.peoplesystemspotential.com. Enjoy, and I hope you continue joining me on this journey.